Story 1. Around 36 hours after a long international flight, it felt amazing at first and then terrifying. Story 2. About 60 hours of flying from Frankfurt, Germany to Brisbane, Australia caused minor visual hallucinations with colors flickering. Story 3. I went to Ibiza for 24 hours without sleeping or staying at a hotel. I spent 12 hours clubbing. Story 4. 5 days on drugs, stimulants, and dealing with mental issues, laughing my ass off. Story 5. I tried this with my best friend in college. My personal record is 33 hours. My friend's record is 30 hours. Story 6. I had a job that kept me awake for days at a time, at least 2 full days in a row, with only a 10-hour break between shifts. I rarely dozed off because it was extremely intense, although during quiet moments I must have napped. Sleep deprivation can make you see things. Remember climbing the stairs to my quarters after work and judging how intense the day had been by how strange the stairs looked. I stayed in that position for several years because it was unbelievably interesting, and the intensity became almost addictive. The pay was excellent. Story 7. I think the longest was 40 hours. Coffee only gets you so far. Story 8. About 60 hours. In the 1990s, I did a shift at work, 2 raves, and a house party. I took a lot of ecstasy and amphetamines. I felt horrendous during my Monday shift and remember holding my breath, hoping I would faint and be sent home. Nowadays, I like to be in bed around 10:30 in the evening, and the only medications I take are painkillers because I am older and it hurts. Story 9. Somewhere around 80 hours. New medications gave me full-blown insomnia. I wasn't a fan. Story 10. I once pulled an all-nighter for an exam, 36 hours straight. I felt like a zombie, but I nailed it. I do not recommend it. Story 11. I spent 6 days trying to quit opioids cold turkey. I drank NyQuil and took melatonin, but nothing helped me fall asleep. Story 12. I was awake for between 24 and 30 hours. No one woke me up, and no one was concerned about it. I had gone a week with little to no sleep before this happened. Story 13. 28 or 29 hours with an international flight and traveling afterward. Staying up late is not for me. Story 14. About 48 hours ago, I was at a festival and did a lot of drugs. Story 15. The trip took about 30 hours. My girlfriend and I were going to Bulgaria for a week. I got up around 10 in the morning, worked from noon until 8 in the evening, then went home, showered, and got ready. Our train to another city left at 10 in the evening. The train ride lasted about 5 to 6 hours. We reached the airport around 5 in the morning, and our plane left at noon. We flew to Bulgaria, got lost on the way to the apartment we had booked, and finally arrived. We immediately went to sleep around 4 in the afternoon and woke up around 10 the next morning. Bulgaria itself was great, but getting there was hard. The train's air conditioning must have been broken. It was unbearably hot inside even though it was February. The hours spent at the airport were some of the most exhausting of my life. Story 16. You do not need sleep when you are always awake, friends. Why change a light bulb when it is already lit? I stayed awake for 4 to 5 days on stimulants when I was in college. Story 17. Just a couple of days ago, I was awake for 24 hours because my 1-month-old son was diagnosed with coarctation of the aorta and needs heart surgery. Story 18. 30 hours after getting sucked into a video game marathon. I thought I was fine until I stood up and almost fell over. Story 19. 28 hours. I was the only radio man aboard ship when we pulled into Mazatlan, Mexico, for 5 days. I felt terrible after staring at teletype machines day and night. Story 20. The episode lasted about 72 hours. I fell asleep for 1 hour and was awakened by a telephone. I was not able to understand what was being said. The room was shrouded in a gray haze. I then slept for 24 hours. Story 21. I was awake for about 28 hours. I worked a graveyard shift installing security cameras, finished the next morning, and then went to my second job in customer service at Walgreens. Story 22. For 48 hours, the newborn was in the hospital near the nursery. I had broken sleep for the next 2 days and began to have microsleeps while holding the baby when I got home. Thank God it got easier. Story 23. Intentionally probably only 30 hours. But I was undiagnosed for my severe sleep apnea for at least 2 years, during which I never reached rapid eye movement sleep because my body would snap me awake when I stopped breathing, 107 times an hour every night. Story 24. About 60 hours. I worked 2 jobs with back-to-back shifts on Friday and over the weekend, and I regretted every minute. I took a lot of stimulants to keep myself going. It got to the point where I was falling asleep while standing. Story 25. During 6th form, I conducted a psychology experiment in which I kept several people awake as long as possible and measured the effects. I stayed awake to ensure they remained awake. We were sleepless for about 4 days before I had to stop. I periodically gave them math and mental health questions, and the change in cognitive ability was shocking. People began to hallucinate and became very aggressive and irritated with the person giving them equations to solve. Story 26. I went almost 2 full weeks in 2018 without normal sleep. There was some sleep mixed in, but it was not actual sleep cycles, just an hour here and there, probably less than 7 hours total over those 2 weeks. I could not string together thoughts and words, my emotions were extreme, my skin felt like it was crawling, and my body was so tired I could barely move while my mind would not shut off. I was living in a small apartment in New York City. I hated living there, and I spiraled into a dark depression. I did not want to pay for the emergency room, so I made an appointment with a psychiatrist and had to wait a week. When I finally met with her, she prescribed Seroquel, and for a non-schizophrenic person it causes deep sleep. I slept about 14 hours the first night I took it. Story 27. I was awake for 36 hours, effectively skipping a night. There were no major problems, only extreme fatigue that made any task impossible to perform. Story 28. The day my child had emergency surgery, I was so tired that I got lost in the hospital and started to cry. Once my child was out of surgery and eating and joking, I crawled into bed with them and took a short nap so I could stay awake and alert while driving them home. Story 29. Maybe around 36 hours. After a party, I stayed up all night handling some things and went to work the next morning. After a workday that felt like forever, I ate and slept for hours. Story 30. 32-year-old male. 60 hours prior to last night's 10-hour sleep. About 110 when I was 18. I only had coffee because methamphetamine makes me sleepy. Should I be studied? Laughing out loud. Story 31. It was a full 48-hour trip from Quebec to France for work. I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours before midnight the day of departure, and I couldn't sleep on the plane. I had a midnight flight. I arrived in the morning and had a train in the mid-afternoon to get back home, with 4,000 euros of camera gear in my bag, so I had to keep an eye on it. Because of the caffeine I drank and the adrenaline from the trip, I couldn't sleep until about 1 a.m. At first it was funny and dizzy, then it felt like a nightmare as I slowly went crazy. I hated it after about 30 hours. Story 32. 3 days. No substances were involved. I was just extremely stressed at my job. The first 2 days were fine, but the third day was horrible. When I finally crashed, I slept for 18 hours straight. Story 33. After 6 long days, I was exhausted, but my brain had other thoughts. It was hell. Story 34. It lasted about 32 hours. Everything felt slow around me. I do not remember feeling tired when I went to bed, but waking up about 10 hours later showed that I needed the rest. Story 35. I can go 40 hours without sleep. I have had a lifelong battle with insomnia, so going more than 24 hours without sleep is not unusual. Story 36. I have been awake for about 50 hours, with 2 or 3 brief naps of about 30 minutes. When I stay awake for more than 24 hours, I find it hard to sleep. Story 37. About 26 hours or so. I had a late-night deployment to production and tried, unsuccessfully, to sleep beforehand. I was on the call longer than we expected. It was glorious to be able to lie down after it was done. Story 38. If I recall correctly, it lasted around 8 days. My dosage of some medication was too high and it kept me awake for too long. I also have insomnia and still do. I have not been drunk before, but I imagine that is what severe intoxication feels like. My vision was distorted, speaking was impossible, and walking was very difficult. After it was over, I slept for about 36 hours. Story 39, 30-something hours. As of now, I have not slept in 21 hours. I work nights and could not sleep when I got home more than an hour later than usual, so I stayed up. I am definitely going to sleep during the day. Laughing out loud. Story 40. It took about 40 hours of work. I deployed the software and it did not work at first. 36 hours later, it worked. I drove home and crashed. Story 41. About 5 days, not with zero sleep but with maybe 2 hours of sleep in total. Story 42. Around 72, things get weird. Just a series of unfortunate events paired with work weaving in and out of them over the course of a few days. Story 43. There were 8 days and 8 nights when I lost my mind briefly in 2022 and started smoking crack for 8 months. It ended with my arrest by the Metropolitan Police, and I finally slept in a Kingston police cell. The hallucinations and mental distortion from sleep deprivation were very real. During this period, I regularly stayed awake for 5 days at a time. Story 44. The effects lasted close to 60 hours, I think. A friend in college gave me some high-strength Vyvanse, 350 milligram pills, if I recall correctly, for my birthday, which was right around finals week. He said they did not really work for him and recommended that I take them all at once. So, as an 18-year-old, I did. By the end of that period, I could barely stay awake and wanted to sleep desperately. When I finally passed out, I slept for about 24 hours. Story 45. For 5 days, I experienced both visual and auditory hallucinations. My washing machine sounded like a Game Boy playing music and seemed to have conversations with people at my front door who were not there. I believe this was a psychotic episode, and I do not recommend it. Story 46. I am 48, and work has kept me busy. I work in information technology, and we were doing a go-live weekend and mass loading data. It was all hands on deck. That was about 20 years ago. I would like to do one more project like that before I retire. I have completed about 14, which in my industry is saying something. Story 47. 35 hours of non-stop work as a chef. I transcended to another plane of reality. Story 48. When I was a teenager with insomnia, I stayed awake for about 72 hours using caffeine pills to see how long I could remain awake. Story 49. I made it 72 hours on just caffeine when I was in my 30s. I can easily do 48 hours now, but I have never required a lot of sleep. I average about 4 to 6 hours a night and maybe 1 or 2 catch-up days a month when I get 8 to 10 hours. Story 50. 34 hours. From 8 in the morning one day to 6 in the evening the next day. I ate a lot, drank a fair amount of alcohol, and was gaming and role-playing the whole time. Story 51. 5 days at Boom Festival in 2002. Completely drowned in acid. Story 52. Around 60 hours. I stayed up all night fooling around with someone, then flew home from Singapore to the United Kingdom. When I was younger, I really could not sleep on planes. Upon landing, I learned that a friend had taken his own life. Story 53. Around 40 hours. I was not doing well and was keeping my mind busy with video games. At least I beat Knights of the Old Republic 2 again. Story 54. Over 40 hours, 2 nights without sleep because of severe depression. Story 55. After about 28 hours, I was ready to murder someone for breathing too loudly. I need my sleep. Story 56. I completed a 24-hour bike race and rode at least 225 miles. My bike computer died at mile 20. I slept for 12 hours straight after the race. Story 57. I was awake for 32 hours. I woke up at 7 in the morning and tried to go back to sleep but could not. I had a night film shoot for my school from 9 in the evening to 7 in the morning. From 9 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon I managed sound in the control room for a mock television show during my college open day. Story 58. 40 hours. A closing to opening shift at Burger King, a night shift somewhere else in between afternoon language classes, and then another night shift that turned into an opening shift. I felt unstoppable like a workhorse. I even went for a run before thinking, I should get some sleep before school on Monday. I then blacked out and woke up Tuesday morning dazed and sore all over. Took me a few days to feel somewhat all right again. It was also the longest I had gone without food because I never thought to grab a burger at work. Story 59. I stayed awake for 55 hours for a supremely stupid sleep deprivation project in a college class. It felt like being on dissociatives that constantly changed how they affected me. I would stop talking mid-sentence or mid-thought and zone out. The physical world felt like it was moving in a bouncy dream world state around me, like reality was cottony. Any appetite disappeared after the 36-hour mark, and I smoked a lot of cigarettes. By the end, every motion or thought felt like a serious chore. Blinking, opening my mouth to speak, lifting my hand to reach for a cup of water, and even remembering to breathe. 3 out of 10. Would not recommend. Story 60. It lasted 2 days or slightly longer, with snowstorm plowing followed by regular shifts. It was brutal. Story 61. 76 hours. 4 of my medications cause difficulty sleeping, and pairing them with caffeine is disastrous. Story 62. I stayed awake for about 65 hours when I had severe insomnia and anxiety in my late teens. I reached physical exhaustion and then slept solidly for 15 hours. Story 63. I spent about 72 hours at Woodstock 99. I was 20 years old in a constantly stimulating environment and had only a few beers one afternoon. I crashed about 20 minutes into the 6-hour car ride home. Story 64. 55 hours. The release of the original Modern Warfare 2 was a special time for many. We counted down the minutes to the game's release. It felt like a unique moment. It was a midnight release. I played until the bus picked me up for school. Went back, did homework, then hopped back on and stayed up all night. I went to school, came back, and played more. By 2 a.m., my brain tapped out. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an actual panther enter my room and slowly approach. I told my friends I was legitimately hallucinating and that it was time to quit. That was wild. Story 65. I got up on a Friday morning and went to work. After work, I left for spring break. I partied all weekend and went to bed on Sunday night. I was delirious and possibly hallucinating on the way home. Story 66. I used to wake up at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday and stay up until 10 in the morning on Saturday, almost every week. I don't think I ever stayed awake much longer than that. Story 67. I was sick with the flu and had to work a 36-hour shift. Luckily, it was a sit-down job and I was at home, so I was thankful for that. Story 68. I once stayed up until approximately 4:22 in the morning on New Year's Day, so I would say about 20 to 21 hours. Story 69. I'm not sure of the exact timing, but about 3 days into a military deployment, I began hallucinating severely. Whatever I thought about would appear, almost like a dream. I remember thinking it would be crazy if all those trees turned into talking trees like in The Lord of the Rings. Then they did. Story 70. It lasted around 40 hours, which I remember vividly. I went to a wedding on Saturday and suddenly I was at another quinceañera party the next day. It was surreal. In the end, I was pale as a vampire and couldn't sleep even when I wanted to. I drank 3 Red Bulls in the last 12 hours. Story 71. A couple of days ago, I was a single mom going to school and working. By then, I had pulled an all-nighter writing an essay, worked my morning shift, and then went to class. During class, I kept noticing holographic embroidery of Chinese dragons all over my professor's suit. He put on a movie and I fell asleep. When I woke up, the dragons were gone. Story 72. Probably around 36 to 40 hours. I stayed up playing one of the World of Warcraft expansions when it first came out, Wrath of the Lich King. I was trying to get the first character of my race to maximum level. Story 73. It was about 38 hours. I woke up in Manhattan visiting a friend. I spent the whole day sightseeing. After dinner, I drove back to Toronto. I arrived home just in time to shower, get dressed, and head to work. I worked the entire day, came home and fell asleep. Story 74. I had probably been awake for 60 hours when my dog decided to ingest drugs from the sidewalk. I could not sleep because I was worried and had to take care of him. By hour 48, I started breaking down. Story 75. 8 days. I tested out of high school as a freshman and had time with nothing really going on in my life. Without a schedule, when a depressive episode hit, I would often stay awake for 2 or 3 days and then sleep for 14 hours. One day, I accidentally reached 4 days awake, and that's when things went bad. People say you start to hallucinate, but it's not like lysergic acid diethylamide or other psychedelic drugs. You do not go on a grand trip and see a bunch of things that are not real. Have you ever tried to sleep and been startled by a coat on the back of a door or a chair because you were sure it was a shadowy monster waiting for you to fall asleep? That's pretty much what hallucinations from sleep deprivation are. You wildly misinterpret everything in your peripheral vision and feel like shadow people are watching you all the time. Paranoia set in after day 4, and I was too scared to sleep for days. Eventually, I managed to sleep by removing all the furniture from my bedroom, cleaning up, and sleeping in the middle of the floor with the lights on. I have a neat superpower now. I can fall asleep almost whenever I want, but I always wake up after 4 hours feeling well rested. Story 76. In high school, I had the ill-advised idea of trying to break the world record for staying awake. I had not researched the harmful effects on people who had attempted it. I lasted about 3 days, became very sick, passed out, and woke 2 days later in my father's bed. Story 77. After about 5 days of setting up and working at a festival, I was not making any sense by the end. Story 78. The Electric Daisy Carnival in Las Vegas kept me awake for almost 40 hours. I flew home the same morning the event ended. I had been awake since the morning of the final day because I had skipped the second day. I did not catch my flight until more than 24 hours later, endured a 6-hour flight, and still had to get home after landing. I remember a woman reaching into her purse while we were in the security line, and I flinched, thinking she was going to punch me. I tried to sleep on the plane, but I kept having increasingly violent hypnagogic jerks, so I gave up on sleeping to avoid causing a scene. Story 79. For 3 days when I was in senior high school, I was the editor for a group project. I barely slept, studying at school from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, then working on the video after school. Exporting the video took hours because I only had an old, low-performance personal computer. It was all worth it. We received the highest score compared with the editors in the other groups, and I slept all weekend afterward. Story 80. It was about 36 hours before I started nodding off at church. I had stayed up all night with friends playing video games. The next morning was Sunday, and my friend's parents dragged us to church. When we got back, my dad picked me up and I fell asleep within 30 seconds of getting home. If I pulled an all-nighter now, almost 15 years since the last one, I would regret it. Story 81. Every Thursday during my first year of college, I woke at 7 in the morning, stayed up all night doing homework, and did not sleep until 7 on Friday evening at the earliest. I may have been the only person in the class who earned an A grade. Story 82. It has been about 60 hours. I cannot remember the last 5 to 6 hours. I felt drunk and kept bumping into things. Story 83. I spent about 72 hours cramming for finals during my first term at university. I tried to sleep but could not because people in the residence kept finishing their parties late every night. Story 84. I worked a 72-hour shift in residential childcare, fueled by a lot of Red Bull and Monster energy drinks. After about 30 hours, I felt amazing, more awake and alert than I have ever been, with energy to spare. That feeling ended around hour 42. And by hour 60 I began feeling lightheaded. And my vision started to narrow. A few more coffees got me through the next few hours of the shift. When I drove home, about 2 minutes down the road I realized my hands and feet did not feel like part of me. So I had my dad pick me up and take me home. I went straight to bed and slept for a solid 24 hours. Story 85. Just under 48 hours awake. When I was 17, I worked overnight at a 24-hour McDonald's from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I woke up around 4 p.m. the day I had a concert to attend that night. I wanted to sleep so I would not be sleep-deprived watching Ozzy Osbourne and Rob Zombie, but I could not sleep, so I played Xbox all day before being dropped off at the concert. I was very tired at the concert, but it was fantastic. When it ended, I called my dad to pick me up. We lived about 30 minutes away and my phone was almost dead. So I told him exactly where I was, the same spot where he had dropped me off a few hours earlier. Took him 5 hours to get me. I sat on a bench, freezing because I was a mall goth and wore Dickies shorts and a band t-shirt in November. I did not get home until about 6 a.m. I did not have work scheduled for a couple of days, so I planned to sleep a lot. As soon as I lay down, I received a call asking me to cover someone who had called out at work from 8 a.m. to noon. Without thinking, I said yes. I got up, showered, and went to work, and did not leave until 3 p.m. I went home and immediately fell asleep on the living room couch. I did not think I could make it to my bed. I slept for 16 hours straight and was woken by my mother and sister, who were panicked. They thought I was on drugs, but I have been straight edge my whole life and was completely sober, just exhausted. In total, I was awake for about 47 hours. There is no feeling like waking up extremely dehydrated and drinking cold water. I felt my body rehydrating and absorbing the water as it went down. I also had not eaten much during that time, so I was very hungry. I called a friend who had a car and we went to McDonald's. I ate 5 McChickens for double cheeseburgers, a large order of fries, and several refills of a large Coca-Cola. After I ate and rehydrated, I felt amazing. I am 33 now, and if I stay awake for even close to 20 hours, I feel awful the next day and for a couple of days afterward. Story 86. Almost 70 hours on an alcohol and cocaine bender. At the end, I remember lying in the dark. The outside lights were just bright enough to see my cat. I began hallucinating that there were 10 of him, including an octopus cat hybrid in the corner near the ceiling. I could not tell which one was real because I heard his meowing coming from all of them. Story 87. I used to do it for more than 72 hours. Nowadays, I have to get my beauty sleep, laughing out loud. Story 88. It had been almost 5 days when my unit was called up for an emergency deployment. Story 89. I unfortunately pulled a lot of all-nighters growing up. I remember one time when I pulled an all-nighter. The next day at school, I felt unwell and just wanted to sleep. When I came home from school at about 3 p.m., I watched television. My brother brought out a large pile of fresh warm laundry from the dryer. I leaned on it without realizing it and fell asleep on it until 7 p.m. My brother woke me up for dinner. I remember feeling gross, delirious, and in pain, the kind of pain you get when you are sick and your whole body aches. Story 90. During the Great Southern California power outage, I was on my way home when it occurred. I had to go back to help close several stores, handling technical and operational tasks. Once the power was restored, I visited multiple stores to fix closing and opening issues. I then worked until noon or possibly 4 in the afternoon. It was a rough day. Driving on the freeway toward the Midway district was striking because it was pitch black, unlike the usual lit and lively scene. It felt like the electrical version of coronavirus disease 2019. Story 91. 4 days. Methamphetamine is not recommended. I remember hallucinating at the supermarket. I couldn't tell whether it was a dream or real life. Story 92. When my son was born, I went a week. I experienced auditory hallucinations and later had postpartum depression. Story 93. Probably about 30 to 34 hours. I had an exceptionally long day in my department at the hospital, and because I was still clocked in when the next day started, I did not get to go home when staff started coming in. Story 94. One night without sleep is no fun. Even if you just get a little sleep, it's far better than no sleep at all. Story 95. It lasted about 72 hours. I took a 24-hour guard shift, then went back to my room to rest. I was called about 2 hours after I returned because they needed another guard. I ran around and then showed up for another 24-hour shift. By the time I got back to my bed, it had been 3 days of coffee and gaming during the nights because nothing happened and no one was coming for me. Now 24 to 36 hours is the most I can do without being a zombie. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.